Once upon a time, there lived a poor orphan whose name was Ma. She was extremely beautiful and lived on the streets, moving from one place to the other begging to make a living. Ma lost her parents in a car accident 10 years ago. She was only 6 at the time, and for all these years, she wandered the streets, sleeping under bridges and street lamps. She took on several menial jobs just to get by, but something happened that made Ma decide that she was no longer safe on the streets. It was a calm night like any other, and Uma met an old woman who offered her some food. She had not eaten a decent meal all day and was so grateful to the old woman for being so kind to her. She sat in the corner and devoured the food like her life depended on it. It was so delicious, and Uma could not help but keep eating, despite knowing that her stomach was full. She had no idea when next she would see food again. Talk more of a food this delicious. So Ma stuffed her stomach with the food, and by the time she was done, her eyes were so dizzy and heavy. She dragged herself to the usual corner where she slept and drifted into a very deep sleep. Her body relaxed like a log of wood as she let nature run its course. A few hours later, Uma woke up to find herself in a shrine, tied up with other young girls her age, who were all unconscious on the floor. Her eyes opened in shock as the juju man walked in and met her awake. Impossible, he said as he pointed at her, revealing that the spirit had rejected her. He ordered that she be set free, and Uma was immediately released. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her inside the forest. Uma had never been this terrified in her entire life. She weaved her way through the dark forest and arrived a lonely road. Ma had no idea where she was. She walked down the lonely road alone, barefoot, hungry and scared. Her clothes were torn from crawling through thorns, and her eyes darted at every rustling leaf. But she kept walking. Something told her that if she stopped, something worse than the shrine would happen to her. Just before the break of dawn, she saw lights ahead, a quiet part of the city that she had never seen before. Big display windows, mannequins in glamorous clothes, designer shops that smelled of money and power. Ma was so flabbergasted. As she stood outside one of the boutiques, trying to catch her breath, a tall, beautiful woman stepped out of the store and met with her.
You like the dresses?
She asked Ma, who smiled and nodded her head. The woman smiled back and asked Ma to follow her into the boutique. Ma gently followed the woman and was led to the changing room. She stood there stunned as the woman brought out a beautiful dress and handed to her. Go take a shower inside and come put on the dress, she said to Uma, who rushed into the shower excitedly to take her bath. Once she was done, she slipped into the dress and her eyes sparkled at how beautiful she looked. You're just perfect, the woman said as she clapped her hand above her head. Ma stood there confused as she wondered why she did that. Before she could understand what was happening, a huge man came out from the door behind the store and pricked a needle in her neck. Ma slumped as the man took her to the coffin in the back room and laid her inside. She stayed in the coffin for over 10 hours. She woke up finally to find herself behind the show glass of the boutique, her body stiff like a mannequin. She was alive, but the world could only see a mannequin, a lifelike mannequin whose purpose was to attract buyers to the store. It was then that Uma realized that the other mannequins in the boutique were also alive. Some had been there for months, others for years. All of them were girls who once walked freely, now trapped behind glass windows, cursed in complete silence. Their eyes held pain, but their faces were frozen in flawless smiles. Ma wanted to scream, but her lips would not move. Her neck couldn't turn. She was stuck, posed with one hand on her hip and the other dangling beside her. The golden dress she wore shimmered under the boutique lights. She was the new showstopper, the new addition to the lineup of mannequins which stood on the show glass of Madame Cadeau's boutique. Every morning, the boutique opened and rich women came in to shop. Some tapped on the glass, some even whispered that the mannequins looked alive, but no one knew the truth except Madame Kado. At night, when the last light went off and the boutique went dark, the curse loosened just enough for the mannequins to whisper amongst themselves. That was when Uma heard the first voice. New girl, a voice said faintly beside her. Don't fight the curse. It only tightens when you struggle. She couldn't turn her head, but she listened. We were once like you. Another soft voice whispered from her right. All of us, run away, homeless girls who hoped for a better life. Nike here was born on the street. Her mother was a mad woman and she never knew her father. She grew up sleeping beside trash bins and bathing in rainwater. She used to dance at traffic lights for coins, hoping anyone would see her and save her. One day, a woman stopped. She looked kind. She offered Nike bread, malt, and a place to sleep for just one night, and Nike followed her, hopeful for the very first time. That night, she was dressed in a silk dress and asked to model it briefly in front of a mirror. The next thing she remembered was darkness. When she woke up, she was in the boutique window frozen. They said I had the perfect body for display. Nike whispered bitterly, but I would have given anything just to be seen as a human, not a decoration. Beside Nike stood Ifoma. Her voice was quiet and slow. My father sold me, she whispered, for a bottle of gin. Mma's heart sank. Ifoma had been the brightest girl in her village. She dreamed of being a teacher, but after her mother died, her father became violent and drunk. One night, a strange woman came to the village. She told the former's father that she would take the burden off his hands. In return, she handed him a small bag of money and a crate of gin. I begged him, Ifoma said, but he didn't even look at me. They brought her to the city, told her she would work as a maid, but they never let her step outside again. She was 13. I've been here ever since. My body grew up, but I didn't. Her eyes glistened under the boutique light, and then, from the far corner, a more elegant mannequin finally spoke. My name is Victoria, she said, revealing that she wasn't poor. Her voice was calm and cold, like a girl who had learned not to cry. I came from a good home, she said, revealing that her parents owned a pharmacy. I had dreams, school, comfort, love until I met him. Victoria had fallen in love with a much older man who she met online. He said she was mature for her age. He called her queen, sent her money, and promised her marriage. One weekend, she snuck out to meet him, and she never made it back. He brought me here to Madame Kado, who turned me into the first mannequin that graced the floors of the boutique, the one they called the original showstopper. They used me to attract others, said if I could be trapped, anyone could. Ma felt something shift inside of her as the stories unfolded. Each of these girls, now beautiful mannequins, were people who had been stolen, tricked, or betrayed. Their bodies now served as art, but their hearts were still human. Ma's heart raced on hearing this. Why me? She managed to whisper through clenched teeth as Victoria, the first mannequin girl, revealed to her that it was because she was beautiful. The more beautiful you are, the more attention you bring to the boutique. Ma could not believe her eyes. She asked how they could escape, and Victoria revealed to her that there was no escape. Once you have been bonded with the spirits in the coffin, there's no turning back, she said to Uma, whose heart sank into her stomach. No escape, she whispered as her chest tightened. Ma could not believe what her life had become. She stood there and watched as the sun began to rise. The boutique door opened and rich women trooped into the store to buy some dresses. Ma had not eaten or slept in hours. Her body was weak, but she could not control it as she stood there like a mannequin, smiling as people tapped on the glass and admired her dress. Ma tried to scream, but her lips were frozen. It was like screaming in one's mind, whilst everyone smiled at you, unaware that you were dying inside. For days, Ma endured the torture. Every morning, she stood motionless, her insides screaming. Every night, she listened to the whispers of girls who had once dared to hope, girls who had once had names, now reduced to decorations. But on the seventh night, something strange happened. A tear rolled down Uma's cheek. Just one, and Uma could not believe her eyes. She told Nike, who gasped in shock on hearing it. We have been trying for months to cry, to get people's attention, but none of us have been able to do so. She said to Uma, who she told that the curse was weakening in her. Victoria, who was stationed at the end of the show glass, began to speak, saying that the coffin did not claim Uma properly. That's why your eyes can still weep. You're the only one whose soul wasn't fully sealed, she said to Uma, who did not respond. She stood there frozen as her heart beat loudly in her chest. That night, while the other mannequins grumbled and complained about their situation, Uma felt something else move. Her index finger twitched for the very first time in days, and Uma could not believe how happy she felt to feel her finger move. She spent hours focusing all her energy on the finger as a sudden warmth began to course through the other fingers. They now moved, and Uma knew that there was hope for her to move again. Morning came, and Uma stood there like nothing happened. People stopped by to admire the dress in the mannequin when one of them noticed that her hands were moving. It's alive! The young woman screamed at the top of her voice, pointing at Uma, who continued to move her hands for the others to see. Soon, the boutique was surrounded by people who pressed their faces to the glass, gasping, whispering, filming with their phones. She moved again. Someone shouted, "Look, her fingers! She's pointing at something! No, she's crying! My God, she's crying!" They all said, as indeed, fresh tears streamed down from Uma's cheeks, cutting clean lines through the makeup painted onto her mannequin-like face. Her fingers twitched and flexed, trembling as the people all trooped into the boutique to find answers. Madame Kado smiled at them and explained that Uma was a special mannequin she imported from China. She can move and cry, and that's what makes her special, she said to the angry people, who at first hesitated as they glanced at her confused. Special technology, Madame Kado added with a smirk on her face. She cost me a fortune. Crime mannequins are the latest trend now in China, she said as the crowd relaxed and apologized to her for the intrusion. Uma's heart sank to realize that the people bought the lie. She had thought that for a moment freedom was near and that someone would break the glass and set them free from bondage. But instead, they laughed and took pictures of her, all smiles but in pain. Only her hands could move as her entire body, including her lips, remained frozen with a forced smile. That evening, long after the boutique had closed, Madame Kado sat in her office as she drank a glass of wine. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with anger. How could I have missed it? She asked herself as she called in her bodyguard, who was stationed in the back room. The same man who pricked Uma with a needle the other day. He walked into her office and Madame Kado ordered him to take Uma off the show glass. Move her to the back room now, before she opens her mouth, before she brings the whole city down on us, she said to the man, who nodded and left. A few minutes later, Uma was lifted off the glass stand. She tried to scream, fight, but her entire body remained stiff. All she could do was pinch the man with her fingers that moved, but that too did not make any difference as the man lifted her and took her away. The other mannequins stood there helpless and horrified. Where are they taking her? Nike whispered as their hearts began to race. The huge man took Uma to the back room and lay down on the hard metal table. The back room was nothing like the display area. It was cold, dark, lined with broken mirrors, old mannequin parts and coffins. Some were closed, some had faint scratches on the inside. Uma lay there helpless as she tried to understand what fate awaited her. She lay there still as Madame Kado walked in with her bodyguard. "You useless girl, you want to put me in trouble," she said angrily to Uma, who lay there helpless and unable to move. "I had great plans for you, Uma, but you chose to ruin it all," she said to Uma, whose chest tightened in horror. Madame Kado snapped her fingers and the huge man approached her with a syringe. Get rid of her, she said to the man as she turned to walk out of the room. Ma began to pray in her heart. She could not believe that her life was finally coming to an end after years of suffering. However, she was comforted with the fact that she was finally going to reunite with her parents who died and left her alone in this cold and wicked world. She lay there, prepared for the worst, when she suddenly heard Madame Cadeau scream out in terror. Her bodyguard plunged the syringe in her neck as he watched her slump to the floor unconscious. Ma could not understand what was happening. She lay there confused as the huge man rushed to her side and gave her a liquid to drink. Immediately, Uma felt life return to her body. It was all like a movie as Uma stood there stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. The huge man approached her and began to plead for her forgiveness. It's all my fault, he said to Uma, who stood there confused as she wondered what he was talking about. Your parents, I killed them, he said to Uma, who opened her mouth in complete shock. The huge man then revealed to her that he was the one responsible for her parents' death. What had happened was that on the day of Uma's parents' accident, Uma was sitting at the back, asleep when the accident happened. Her father, who was driving, saw a young boy run across the road, chasing a rolling ball. Without thinking twice, he swerved the car violently to avoid hitting the boy. The car spun out of control and hit a tree, bursting into flames. Uma's parents died instantly, but Uma survived. She laid on the floor unconscious when the young boy rushed to her side and began to scream for help. He sat there broken by her side. He sat there broken when he noticed that Uma had a strange mark behind her ears. It was the same mark he saw on the first day that Uma arrived at the boutique. The huge man, whose name was Chimdi, injected her with a temporary numbing solution instead of the paralysis substance that Madame Cadeau ordered him to use. Chimdi had seen enough. For years, he had worked under Madame Cadeau, watching silently as girl after girl turned into a mannequin. At first, he had been threatened, warned that his family would suffer if he disobeyed. Then over time, the fear became numbness and the numbness became obedience. But the day Uma arrived, something inside him cracked. It was the mark behind her ear that changed everything. Chimdi was responsible for the death of her parents. He could not sit back and watch her suffer after all that he had put her through already. The accident had haunted Chimdi all of his life. As a boy, he never forgot the look in Uma's mother's eyes as the car swerved to avoid him. He had lived with the guilt of their death, even as his mother tried to convince him that it was an accident. When he saw the birthmark behind Uma's ears, his heart broke to realize that Uma was homeless because of him, that Uma was about being used as a mannequin because he killed the very people who could have saved her and provided her with a better life. So Chimdi decided to save her life, even if it meant sacrificing himself in the process. He gave her the numbing injection to make it seem like she was completely paralyzed before the ritual was done to allow the spirits take over her body completely. However, since the wrong injection was given to her, the spirits were unable to take over her body completely, and that was why Uma could still cry. That was why she could still feel. That was why on the seventh night, her fingers twitched. Uma stood there trembling, still absorbing Chimdi's confession. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts as her limbs became alive again. The stiffness slowly faded as Chimdi began to speak to her. We don't have much time, he said to Uma, who he told to go get help. Uma ran out of the boutique to a nearby police station. She burst into the police station barefoot, her golden dress torn and her eyes red from crying. The officers on duty were startled at the sight of her. She looked like a ghost returning from the dead, and the officers could not help but listen to what she had to say. Please, she cried, gripping the edge of the counter. They are alive. The mannequins in the boutique, they are all girls. Please, you have to save them. The officers looked at themselves confused. Young lady, you need to calm down, one of the officers said to her as he asked what boutique she was talking about. Madame Cadeau's boutique. Please, I'm not mad. I was one of them. She turns girls into mannequins. She traps them. Please come with me now. Whether it was the conviction in her voice or the desperation in her tears, one of the senior officers stood up. Get the team, he ordered, as they all stormed to the boutique. When they arrived, Madame Kado was still unconscious on the floor in the back room. The other mannequins remained frozen on display, their bodies still locked by the curse. But the moment Madame Kado woke up, she was forced to reverse what she did, and the girls regained their consciousness. The police broke into the back room and were stunned by what they found. The strange room was filled with old shoes, bags, and clothes that belonged to missing girls, broken phones, photographs, coffins lined with strange carvings, evidence of rituals, syringes, diaries with girls' names, some reported missing over 5 years ago. Chimdi, kneeling with his hands raised, confessed everything to them. Madame Kado tried to justify what she did. You don't understand. I made them beautiful. They were nothing before they came to me. They were useless, homeless, dirty, unwanted. Her words earned her a dirty slap from one of the female officers who could not believe what she did to young girls. The story made national headlines. The mannequins were alive, read the front pages of newspapers. Mma was interviewed by human rights organizations. The boutique was sealed. Madame Kado was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Chimdi, though arrested, was offered clemency after his testimony helped rescue over 32 girls trapped in similar conditions around the state. As for Umar, she was offered housing, a scholarship and therapy, but more than anything, she was given a chance to live. The lesson to be learned from this story is that even in the darkest and most hopeless corners of life, light can still break through. Hope, no matter how fragile, is a form of resistance. Mass tears, small, silent, and seemingly powerless, became the crack through which truth spilled out and injustice was exposed. This story also reminds us that people are not possessions. Every human life has worth, regardless of wealth, background, or appearance. The girls who were trapped behind glass weren't mannequins. They were dreamers, daughters, survivors, whose only mistake was trusting a kind face in a cruel world. It teaches us that evil often hides behind elegance and that we should always remember that all that glitters is not gold. I hope you enjoyed the story.